Well, hello everyone. Before I get started here, before I forget, I should say, I would like to mention a couple of things. First, my website, ewatchman.com, was offline yesterday for a few hours, and I've gotten a few emails and comments from people saying they couldn't get on. It's back online, but for some reason it's not being indexed sometimes or whatever. You may need to clear your browser's cache, try a different browser, or try linking to it from another website, such as the link on the front of my YouTube channel or on the front page of my book at jehovahisking.com. Also, I wanted to mention sometimes when people leave comments, they also leave a link sometimes to another YouTube video or a blog or website, something. And whenever there's a hyperlink embedded in the comment, it automatically goes into the spam bin. And I don't really want to promote someone else's YouTube video or website, particularly XJWs. I mean, they certainly don't link to me. So if you're going to put a link, I mean, I allow links to my website because I refer to articles I've written or chapters in my book, such as on this topic of Zephaniah, there's a link below to a chapter in the book. So, but again, if you put a link, it's going into spam. I don't check the spam bin regularly, so if your comment doesn't appear, that's probably why. Also, as I missed yesterday on my daily word, but I'm making every endeavor to do these videos on a regular daily basis, and I thought once a week or so I would entertain questions from you, the viewers or readers of my website. So if you have questions, preferably send them to the Watchman's Post at gmail.com. If you leave them here as a comment, they might get lost. I don't get a chance to read all the comments, especially if the video is a few days old. So Watchman's Post at Gmail, and we'll try to get to some questions in a day or two. I thought I would speak a little bit about the prophecy of Zephaniah, one of the so-called minor prophets, but has a big-time message for us having to do with the day of Jehovah. It's mentioned in Zephaniah half a dozen times, I think. It's really referring, as I've mentioned in previous videos, the day of Jehovah and the day of Jesus Christ are the same thing. The Watchtower teaches the day of Jesus Christ began in 1914. The day of Jehovah begins during the tribulation. But as Zephaniah shows, the day of Jehovah is when he judges his house, which is what Christ does upon his coming, which the Watchtower says took place in 1918. That's when the messenger of the covenant came, as foretold in Malachi, and everything's good now. All right? But the prophecy of Zephaniah starts off here. It's pretty scary. He says, I will completely sweep away everything from the surface of the ground, declares Jehovah. I will sweep away man and beast. I will sweep away the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea and the stumbling blocks along with the wicked ones. And I will remove mankind from the surface of the ground, declares Jehovah. Well, we know that Jehovah is not speaking in absolute terms. There's, you might say he's using hyperbole, but Jesus did say it would be as in the days of Noah, and that was a pretty thorough devastation of man and beast. And yet there were survivors. So obviously, Jehovah is speaking about more than the destruction of Jerusalem, because that is the setting in which this prophecy was originally directed. As we know, Jehovah brought in the Babylonian armies, and they devastated not only Jerusalem, but many of the surrounding nations, including Egypt as well, and Tyre, and many other nations. He said, this is interesting. It says, I will remove the stumbling blocks along with the wicked. And that is exactly what Jesus said he would do when he comes to commence the harvest. And the harvest is a conclusion of the system of things. As I mentioned, that's the end of Christianity. As far as the preaching of the good news, the disciple making, Bible study work, that all concludes, and then the harvest commences. Jesus said during the harvest, he will send out his angels, and they will what? Collect out of his kingdom all things causing stumbling, the stumbling blocks of the wicked, and all persons doing lawlessness. So that's what this is talking about. That's why I say the day of Jehovah and the day of Jesus Christ are the same thing. The Watchtower says the harvest took place, 1918 or whenever. And the wicked that were removed were Christendom. Makes no sense. But it's going to get fixed. Well, anyway, going on with verse 4, he says, I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all the inhabitants of Jerusalem. I will wipe out from this place every vestige of Baal, the name of the foreign god priests, along with the priests, and those who bow down on the rooftops to the army of the heavens, and those who bow down and pledge loyalty to Jehovah while pledging loyalty to Malcham. Malcham was the god of the Ammonites, also known as Moloch. But it's interesting, as I've mentioned in previous videos, Jerusalem is symbolic of Christ's congregation. Why? Well, a number of reasons. For one, King David, when he began conquering all of Jehovah's enemies after he became king, Jerusalem at that time was still held by the Jebusites. And David took it, and it became known as the City of David. And eventually he moved there, built his palace, wanted to build a temple to Jehovah, but Jehovah wouldn't let him because he was a man of bloodshed and so forth. But David, of course, was the forefather of Jesus Christ. So Jesus in prophecy is called my servant David, or son of David. Also, of course, Christianity began in Jerusalem. Jesus Christ, his ministry ended, his life ended in Jerusalem, and then the Holy Spirit was poured out upon the 120 in Jerusalem. The anointing began there in Jerusalem. The apostles were headquartered originally in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem becomes a symbol of Christ's congregation, his kingdom over which he rules before he takes over rulership of the world. And that's why in the harvest, Jesus said his angels will collect out of his kingdom, or out of Jerusalem, if you will. As Paul said, you've approached a heavenly Zion. So Jehovah's talking about clearing out the evil from his people, from Christ's congregation. It's interesting, are there Baal worshipers in Christ's congregation? When Jesus is on the earth, there were no Baal worshipers because Jehovah annihilated them when he destroyed literal Jerusalem. When the Jews came back from captivity, they did not start worshiping Baal again, or Malcham, or any of those gods at the Chemosh. But it's interesting, if you read in Revelation, Jesus' letters to his congregations, some of his congregations were infiltrated by an evil influence There was the sect of Nicolaus, of course, which Jesus said he hated. And then there was this woman Jezebel. Now, the literal Jezebel was a Baal worshiper. And here she is exerting influence within Christ's anointed congregation, teaching his slaves to eat things that have been sacrificed to idols and so forth. And there's also a Balaam influence. So, how does that correlate with what's happening today? Well, you notice there that there were those who were pledging loyalty to Jehovah and also to Malcham. So there are those within Christ's congregation at the time that Jesus comes who outwardly appear dedicated to Jehovah, they call themselves Jehovah's Witnesses, but like the superfine apostles that infiltrated the Corinthian congregation, whom the inspired apostles said were agents of Satan, who merely disguised themselves as ministers of righteousness. Think about that. That means they went out preaching. They got up on the platform back then, gave public talks. They were Greek orators, very polished speakers, no doubt. That's why they belittled Paul, and his speech is contemptible. His presence is weak. They were Satan's agents, whom Jehovah allowed for a reason, obviously. Satan hasn't changed tactics, has he? There will be this evil influence up until Christ comes, till the angels remove the wicked. We can't do it. You can't discern who they are. They're too clever. They are disguised. But secretly, they worship Satan. That's who Baal is. Satan just used these gods as a front for various demons, but it's been known, there's been rumors that the watchtower is run by Masons and that Russell was a Mason. And I mean, the evidence is certainly there that he was surrounded by Masons and he knew a great deal about it. He denied that he was a Mason. I believe him, but I believe he was influenced. And of course, when he died a few years later, the Masons put that pyramid there a few feet from his gravestone. And now I visited there a few years ago. I put a little video on my website on the category of side notes. And there's a Masonic temple at the foot of the graveyard there. But whatever influence they exerted back then, it seems it is more prevalent now, considering this Eye of Horus Assembly Hall in Denmark. The Watchtower last year, they did this program on JW broadcast called The Inside Story. And you can see right there in the studio, there's two different backdrops of this Masonic triangle. So they're getting very bold and advertising their presence there. But in a sense, they've pledged their loyalty to Jehovah and also the God of the Masons, who is Satan the devil. It's interesting, verse 8, it goes on the day of Jehovah's sacrifice, I will call to account the princes, the son of the king, and those wearing foreign clothing, and I will call to account everyone who climbs onto the platform on that day, those who fill their master's house with violence and deception. Well, the princes, those would be persons who are anointed, right? Sons of the king. And it's interesting, it says everyone who climbs on the platform on that day. Apparently in olden times, a platform would be something of an altar where they would offer up a sacrifice to their God, perhaps in the name of Jehovah, but really intended for Baal or whoever. But in the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, we use that expression too, don't we? Getting up on the platform. And there's a footnote in the New World translation, it says it could be translated podium. Right? So quite appropriately, these men who are worshiping two different gods get up on the platform, the podium, like the superfine apostles. They're orators, they speak at assemblies and perhaps on JW broadcasts, right? So Jehovah's going to find them out, isn't he? And that's why it goes on to, in verse 12, at that time I will carefully search Jerusalem with lamps, and I will call to account the complacent ones who say in their heart, Jehovah will not do good and he will not do bad. Well, in the ancient fulfillment, there was no need for God to carefully search literal Jerusalem because everyone was virtually either killed or taken off to captivity. A few were left behind, Jeremiah for one, but eventually they ran down to Egypt, and Jehovah sent Nebuchadnezzar down there and had them wiped out for not obeying him. So again, when he says, I'll carefully search Jerusalem with lamps, it's like they're concealed within the organization, but Jehovah can see who they are. He can see in the dark, you might say, and he'll find out where they are, and he's going to take them out. And it's interesting that they say in their heart, Jehovah will not do good, Jehovah will not do bad. They don't voice it, it's just in their heart. They don't necessarily not believe God intellectually. They will say, I'm a believer, I believe Jehovah exists, but they don't believe he'll do anything. He's not going to bring the new system. They've been saying it's coming for years and years, it's not coming. And he's never going to bring Armageddon, forget it. Let's just do our religion thing, make some money, whatever, and live comfortably, retire here in our new digs at Warwick, But Jehovah reads hearts, doesn't he? So he's going to call people to account for what they believe in their heart. So, interesting, verse 13, their wealth will be plundered and their houses will be devastated. They will build houses, but they will not occupy them, and they will plant vineyards, but they will not drink wine from them. And then as the great day of Jehovah is near, it is near, and it is approaching very quickly. The sound of Jehovah is bitter. There a warrior cries out. The day of Jehovah is a day of fury, a day of distress and anguish, a day of storm and desolation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick gloom, a day of horn and of the battle cry. So this is Jehovah's judgment upon Jerusalem. And it says in many prophecies that their wealth will be taken in various terms. It reiterates that same thing in verse 18. Neither their silver nor their gold will be able to save them in the day of Jehovah's fury, for by the fire of his zeal the whole earth will be consumed. Oh, it's not talking about the literal globe, but all of mankind will be, well, what did Jesus say? The day is coming in upon the entire inhabited earth. And that was in the context of the conclusion of the system and particularly the desolation of Jerusalem, Christ's congregation. It's interesting in the letter of James, which is addressed to Christians, the symbolic 12 tribes that are scattered about. And he tells those who are rich that they're storing up judgment for themselves, that their wealth will be consumed by fire. Exactly the same thing says here in Zephaniah. So we all know that the Watchtower is a very wealthy organization, that they've amassed tens of millions, hundreds of millions, who knows. It's a private corporation. They don't have to reveal their finances to anyone. You know, and their latest money-making scheme, and I mentioned this before, but brothers and sisters, you know, pour their heart and soul into the Kingdom Hall building projects. They donate money, they donate their time and labors physically building Kingdom Halls, and they pay off their loans to the society. And after their loans are paid off, who owns those Kingdom Halls? Not the local brothers who paid for them and built them with their own sweat. The Watchtower owns those facilities. And in the last few years, they've put dozens, maybe hundreds, up for sale. Why? Because they own them. They want the money. Real estate prices have inflated massively. And perhaps the attendance has dwindled. Instead of consolidating congregations, they disband them all and send them to surrounding Kingdom Halls, whereas some communities would have a Kingdom Hall. For example, in Michigan here, there was a Kingdom Hall in Marshall. They shuttered it about a year ago, dispersed everyone. Now they have to drive to Albion or somewhere else. And the Watchtower takes that money, puts it into their coffers. Thank you. But here the God of justice is saying their wealth is going to be vaporized. And of course, this whole system of things runs on money. It's all going to crash. I've been talking about it for years. I've been expecting it. I thought it was going to come down in 2008. A lot of people thought that, but here we are 10 years later, and at some point it's going to come down, and the Watchtower will be out of business, more or less. Well, let's take a look at some verses in the second chapter. And this is exhortation to us now, where he says, "Gather together, yes, gather yourselves, O nation that feels no shame. Before the decree takes effect, before the day passes just like chaff, before the burning anger of Jehovah comes upon you, before the day of Jehovah's anger comes upon you, seek Jehovah, all you meek ones of the earth, who observe his righteous decrees, seek righteousness, seek meekness. Probably you will be concealed on the day of Jehovah's anger." So Jehovah is not speaking to literal Jews living in Judah at all, is he? All you meek ones of the earth. He's speaking to you and I who've endeavored to follow Christ, who hope to be among the meek, who receive God's blessing. And here God says, my anger is coming upon you. So the whole organization will have to suffer the brunt of Jehovah's anger because of what the leadership have done to offend Jehovah. That's the way it worked back in ancient times. The priests, the sons of the king, they led the nation into apostasy. Jehovah's rage came against the entire nation. That's the way it works. But I won't read the rest of that chapter. But as all the other prophecies show, Jehovah punishes his people first, then he restores them, and then what? He punishes the nations who persecute his people, and then he judges them even more severely, ultimately destroys them. Yeah? Okay. Chapter 3. Woe to the rebellious, the polluted, the oppressive city, Jerusalem, Christ's congregation. She has obeyed no voice. She has accepted no discipline. In Jehovah, she has not trusted. She has not drawn near to her God. The Watchtower says this is Christendom. But here Jehovah says, these are his people who call upon him. Her princes, there's the princes again. Jesus is Prince of Prince, those who are anointed or in union, supposedly, with Christ. Remember, there is a faithful slave. There's also one who will be judged as an evil slave. And that's what we're talking about here. Her princes within her are roaring lions. Her judges are wolves in the night. They do not leave even a bone to gnaw until morning. Her prophets are insolent, treacherous men. Her priests defile what is holy. They do violence to the law. Well, isn't it defiling what is holy, selling a dedicated facility? The brothers built those kingdom halls, dedicated them to Jehovah, making them Jehovah's property. And for no other reason other than we can get the money, they're sold. That is treating something holy as if it were ordinary thing, undedicated to God. So they'll have to pay for that. You know, this god Malcham, or Molech, he had a taste for blood. He liked to be worshipped with child sacrifice. And the Jews sacrificed their own children, putting them into flames to this demon god. And you know, the priests, so-called, among Jehovah's Witnesses, the leadership, have done the same thing. They haven't offered up a literal burnt sacrifice, but they've sacrificed the innocence of who knows how many children. Jehovah knows. He knows the exact number, thousands, tens of thousands. The Watchtower is, they have a database, we know, of over 20,000 known pedophiles. Others are unknown. They've never been reported. A lot of children have been molested. They've never come forward. You can be sure of that. But again, Jehovah knows. Sometimes it takes them years to come forward. And maybe in the meantime, the perpetrator has molested other victims. But the Watchtower's policy, so-called, has directly contributed to this. In their misguided efforts to prevent Jehovah's name from being brought into reproach. And they've misapplied the law, as it says here. They've done violence to the law. Oh, we have to have 2 witnesses. A child comes forward. You know how much courage that takes? Well, did anybody see brother so-and-so rape you? No. And you can't speak to anybody about this. We'll disfellowship you. Your parents, you go to the police, we'll sanction you too. We talked to the legal department. They said, no. The state doesn't require us to report it. You keep your mouth shut. I shouldn't laugh. It's horrible. The Watchtower has done this. I have firsthand knowledge of this when I was an elder, a couple of cases. I was stunned at their lack of interest in pursuing prosecution against a perpetrator of crimes against a child. So what if the state doesn't require you to report it? It's still a crime. Jehovah embedded it into the law he gave to the Israelites, that the judges had to judge in favor and support the oppressed, the widows and the orphans, those who were disadvantaged. That same law is embedded in the law of Christ. In fact, again, in the letter of James, the form of worship that is clean in God's eyes and undefiled is looking after orphans and widows in their tribulation and keeping unspotted from the world. Can the Watchtower boast that they've looked after the orphans or those who are, an abused child may not be a literal orphan. That's not the point, the principle. Someone who, children are at a disadvantage. They're told to respect older people, all right? And child abusers, pedophiles know that, and so they groom them. They treat them kindly, and then they get them into a situation where they abuse them, and the child is rendered helpless because of the cunning of the abuser. And the Watchtower has done everything to suppress, oppress the victim and support the abuser. While the Watchtower claims are... When I objected to a case some years ago, and I went to see the circuit overseer who was visiting another congregation. He wasn't my circuit overseer, but I went to see him about a case in his circuit that I was familiar with, and the district overseer was visiting. He was really annoyed that I would take up their time talking about this case, but the circuit overseer, whom I highly respected, he was a great man, I thought, but he did this gesture. He goes, our hands are tied. And at the time, I was just like, okay. But now, of course, I understand. His hands were tied by the legal department. They gave strict instructions to elders. I remember reading the letter back late 80s, early 90s, whenever. Whenever you get knowledge of allegations of child abuse, you do nothing but pick up the phone, call the legal department hotline, and they will give you instructions. And what they do, basically, they look their database, okay, this occurred in Texas. It's not required that they report there. Do not report this crime. And if the Watchtower really wanted to help abused children, you would call the police. First thing, that would be the instructions. A crime has been committed in your congregation, you call the police. Why? Well, for one thing, the Apostle Paul said in the 13th chapter that those superior authorities are there by Jehovah. They are our ministers. And they're there to punish wrongdoers. That's the police, part of the superior authorities. They have powers granted to them by civil authorities. And they have expertise in dealing with all kinds of crimes against children. You bring in the police, you bring in a medical examiner, you bring in a psychiatrist that is trained to discern if a child is telling the truth. You examine them to see if they've been physically molested. You run a background check on the perps. He may have committed crimes in another state or something. One of the child abusers is on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. The McLean creep in San Diego. The Watchtower let him move from congregation to congregation, molested who knows how many children, multiple, and then he took off, has some alias, disguise, but the FBI's after him. But just think if the Watchtower would have told the elders in San Diego, you get on the phone and call the police right now, and you get that guy, put the spotlight in his face and interrogate him, and let's get this guy. But no, he's on the loose. And where are his victims? So if the Watchtower really wanted to help children, they would use all of the expertise of the police and professionals, and they could serve as a second witness. And they would have a clean conscience before Jehovah. If they overstepped the law, so be it. Well, we didn't exactly have two witnesses, but we knew we were under obligation from the Almighty that we had to look after these children and do everything. As an elder, I would rather stand before Jehovah and say, look, I called the cops on this guy. I know we only had the one witness, the child, but I just felt like that was the right thing to do. If I was wrong, I'll take the punishment. They do violence to the law. Okay. Their prophets are insolent, treacherous. I don't need to go into that, do I? Virtually everything the Watchtower teaches, excuse me. I was out on the lawnmower today and clouds of dust and, I'm sorry. I don't need to go into the fraud of 1914 and, the fraud that we're living in a spiritual paradise, the fraud that we're speaking a pure language. Oh, that's coming up here, isn't it? Okay. Sometimes someone just left a comment on one of the videos recently, said, I believe that Jehovah used to be, backing the Watchtower and Jehovah's Witnesses, but not anymore. And they cite, all the stumbling blocks of the wicked, right, that Jehovah's going to remove. But according to this prophecy, Jehovah is in the midst of his people. Even with all of this wrongdoing, he is in their midst, loyally trying to steer them aright. But you see, God does not override our own desires and intentions of the heart, does he? We're free moral agents. And he lets us go on in the wrong way. He tries to steer us aright. Going back to Cain, when they were put out of the Garden of Eden, I suspect, humans were very, very naive and still had a measure of innocence, didn't really know that this creature, Satan, was misleading them. Jehovah spoke personally with Cain and said, are you rightly hot with anger? There is sin crouching at the entrance and its craving is for you, and you, for your part, had better get the mastery over it. Will you? And of course he didn't. But God, loyally, he couldn't override his free moral agency, his right to choose, but he tried to reach Cain. And Jehovah has tried to steer his people aright. Verse 5, this is still in chapter 3. Jehovah is righteous in her midst. He does no wrong. Morning by morning, he makes his judgments known, as unfailing as the daylight. But the unrighteous one knows no shame. There's a man of lawlessness. A satanic man of lawlessness sits within. He knows no shame. I put the face of Stephen Lett on some of my videos. He's like the poster boy of the stupid prophets, right? Whether that's fair or not, doesn't matter, but they put his face up there on JW broadcasts and so forth. But I saw a video clip of him in the so-called morning worship. And he said something like, opposers say that Jehovah's Witnesses allow child abuse. He goes, that's ridiculous. If anybody protects children, it's Jehovah's organization. Enough to make you puke, isn't it? Well, Jehovah goes on to say he's going to take care of these boasters. But he's tried to set them right. Anyway, verse 8. So keep yourselves in expectation of me, declares Jehovah. Didn't Jesus say that? Keep in expectation of him, of his coming, the coming of the Son of Man, because he's coming to do Jehovah's work. He's coming to judge his people, Jehovah's people. Keep in expectation in the day until I rise up to take the plunder. The older version of the New World Translation says, till I rise up to the booty. And they fortunately changed that because words change connotation, right? For my judicial decision is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out on them my indignation, all my burning anger. For by the fire of my zeal, the whole earth will be consumed. For then I will change the language of the peoples to a pure language. The Watchtower says they speak the pure language now. Here it clearly says this change will not come until the day of Jehovah rising up to the plunder, when he pours out his fury on the nations. Then, see, that's the treachery of the false prophets. Yeah? So that they may all call on the name of Jehovah. Do the literal Jews call upon the name of Jehovah? Those that think this prophecy applies to literal Israel? Of course not. Okay. Jehovah goes on to say, on that day you will not be put to shame. So this is after he punishes, then he redeems, gives them the pure language. On that day you will not be put to shame, because of all your deeds with which you rebelled against me. For then I will remove the haughty boasters from among you. Is God going to remove the clergy from Christendom and pour out his blessing on all the churches who don't call on his name, who refuse to acknowledge his existence? Jesus is God, there's no Jehovah, he's all one and the same mess. No. I will remove the haughty boasters from among you, and you will never again be haughty in all my holy mountain. I will allow a humble and lowly people to remain in your midst, and they will take refuge in the name of Jehovah. Those remaining of Israel, Jehovah's organization, will practice no unrighteousness. They will not speak a lie, nor will a deceitful tongue be found in their mouths. Can't make that boast now, can we? There's plenty of lies that get repeated. It's part of the pure language. Jesus came in 1914. We're Jehovah's pure people. We're pure religion. Well, that's pretty boastful, isn't it? And Jehovah's going to shut all that down when his anger comes, like a flooding torrent of fire and fury. And those that think Jehovah will not do anything good, he won't do anything bad, whew, you're in for a big surprise, And it's coming down soon. Okay, so that's going to wrap it up for this daily word. As I say, if you have questions, let me know. I'd like to get a few more questions before I do a answer session. So until then.